Stereolust 5 with my guest David Bedford, who is a Beatles author and historian. He's the author of Liddypool, The Fab 104, which I really want to get into, and Finding the Fourth Beatle. Yeah, I find your journey pretty fascinating, man. How does one become a Beatles historian?
Not by design, because after I left school at 18, I worked for an insurance company, and all was going swimmingly. No, it was a good job. Had a young family, and then at the age of 35, my doctor told me to stop working, which I wasn't really in my plan to stop working at 35. Eventually, they diagnosed a condition called fibromyalgia, which is like a chronic pain condition. And it's a weird one. It's really weird because it's like every muscle joint and stuff aches 24/7, but it's not degenerative. So it's weird. I have arthritis as well, which is a bit degenerative, but it mucks up your life completely. So from working long days but good days, playing sport, everything, within sort of about 12 months or so, I couldn't walk like 20 yards.
Wow.
And it was drastic. And because I had 3 young kids, my wife had given up work to look after the kids. So everything had to sort of change quite quickly. And funnily enough, it was talking to my doctor, who was a fantastic man. And he said, look, this is it. You've got the diagnosis. There's no cure. They don't even know what causes it. It happens. You've got to do something. We can manage pain and because it disrupts your sleep and all kinds of stuff. So we can give you medication. But your options are you can sit in a corner, be in pain, feel sorry for yourself. Or while you're sat in that corner, keep your brain active and find something that interests you. And at that time, our kids were at Dovedale School, which is where John Lennon and George Harrison had attended. They'd all been born in the same hospital that John had been born in as well. And we were doing a fundraiser. And the person who responded to our request for money was Yoko Ono. And Yoko got in touch and gave us a very generous donation. And so I thought, that's not the Yoko Ono that everybody thinks of. And so through a mutual friend, he said that I'm writing for a Beatles fanzine. I said, do you think they'd be interested in the story of what Yoko's done? So I got in touch with them and they said, yeah.
Can we linger on that?
That was the London Beatles fan club.
Can we linger on that for a second? How long was that period from you receiving the donation from Yoko? But let's start with the diagnosis, receiving the donation, and then being asked to contribute to the newsletter.
Oh, that was a matter of months. So I was signed off work in the June of 2000. So we're nearly 23 years ago now. I think it was within about 2 or 3 weeks of that Yoko gave us the donation. And then I submitted the article then, maybe 2 to 3 months after that. And so my first writing on the Beatles appeared not long after that had happened. So everything was sort of happening and changing massively in a short space of time. It was quite weird. It really was.
It sounds like it. Do you remember what that first article was?
Well, yeah, because so London Beatles Fan Club magazine, and it was the story of
of the donation,
how Yoko had given us this money, and because we've been we were trying to raise money to improve the playground for the children, so we'd formed a charity to do the fundraising, and we ended up with national media coverage because of the Beatles connection. We did an open day, which my wife and I organised, which was for anybody who'd ever attended Dovedale to come back and see it. And we had over 600 people come, and that was in the June as well. And so that I just thought that the story should be told. You know, we were looking for about £27,000, and Yoko said, "Well, I'll give you 30,000.
Wow.
Cover all the work you need to do. Bit of money in the pot." And she came over and visited the school, and had made then subsequent visits to that, and given more money to the school.
Wow.
As well. And I just thought it was a story that should be told, because that wasn't the Yoko I'd been led to believe was responsible for breaking up the Beatles and all kinds of horrible things over the years.
Yeah, it's fairly one shade whenever she's talked about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's done a lot, you know, not just for Dovedale, but for Liverpool.
Right.
She's been very generous in John's memory.
That's very nice to hear another side of a story that people, you know, think that they know about already.
Yeah.
So that's how things got started, and then how did it continue? What happened next?
So I thought, right, well, I enjoyed writing that. I'd never written for anything really in the past, so I started doing that for the quarterly magazines, and because it was the London Beatles fan club, I said, "Look, is anybody covering anything that happens up in Liverpool?" And they said no. I thought, well, if you're a Beatles magazine, you need some Liverpool content. So I said, well, okay, well, if the stories, I'll cover them up here. So I started sort of for any events, things like that. I thought, well, I'll write about them. I'll try and meet the people. And I just thought, I started reading more, because I had more time on my hands. I started reading, and I was reading Beatles books. I was thinking, you know, because I've grown up with all this Beatles history around my whole life. Because I come from the Dingle where Ringo's from. Literally the bottom of the road where Ringo was born, Madryn Street.
Wow.
Just go like 20 yards from that was my house. So I went to the same primary school that Ringo had gone to, down in the Dingle. So I lived around there till I was 24. And then we moved out here. So I live now just off Penny Lane. So I've had the Beatles around my whole life, and I thought, well, this would be fun just to find out more about the Beatles at Liverpool. So I went looking for a book, and there was a little guidebook, that was it. So I thought, well, there must be more than that. So I started reading other Beatles books.
Yeah.
Trying to find out more about, you know, where I was growing up. And I thought, I've always been a keen photographer. I thought, I'll just go and take photos. I'll put a photo album together or something. And then it just sort of became an obsession. And I was thinking, because I'm reading these books and thinking, well, that's not right. And these people are writing about Liverpool and getting it wrong. I'm thinking, no, that's wrong. I know that's wrong. That place doesn't exist. That could not have happened that way. And then just starting to try and meet people who were connected to the story of the Beatles. And that involved in 2004, John's original Quarrymen. So I invited them to come to Dovedale School to do like a fundraiser and a concert and stuff, and that was brilliant.
What was the word that you used?
So,
John's original.
The Quarrymen. So John Lennon's first group. So John formed the Quarrymen in the summer of '56.
Oh wow! Was this a band before the Beatles? Yeah. I'm not aware of them.
Yeah. So John formed them in the summer of '56. He invites Paul to join them in July '57. George then joins by the end of '57, and they used the name Quarrymen really until the end of 1959. So the original lineup, they'd got back together back in 1997. So I invited them to play at the school, and they did the concert, and it was a brilliant night. And I got to know them and become friends with them, which is great. So I started wanting to know more about the Beatles story in Liverpool. And so the shorter version is, I couldn't find a book on the Beatles in Liverpool, so I wrote it. And I spent 9 years researching it, meeting lots of people, interviewing them, taking hundreds of photographs, trying to put it all together. And that's what Liddypool ended up being.
Wow.
In 2009.
9 years, that's a long time.
I'm a slow writer.
Well, you said you'd never written anything before that article. As someone who has like a fleeting, talking really fleeting interest in writing, that's never written anything, I can't imagine putting together a full book. So I won't judge you for taking 9 years to.
I'm getting a little bit quicker now.
Yeah.
I'm getting it down to about 2 or 3 now.
That's pretty good. You said that this didn't happen by design, but before it did happen, was there any interest in the Beatles at all? Because I know, like, everyone has that one person or a few people in their town that do really well, and everyone sort of talks about them. I can't imagine growing up in the same place as the Beatles. So was there any interest beforehand that sort of made this interest, I don't know, more likely, or?
Yeah, it's really from, I mean, I was aware of the fact of going to the same school that Ringo had gone to. And so growing up around there, you knew that was Ringo land. It was in the Dingle. My interest probably started with learning the guitar. So that'd be sort of late 1970s. So when I was about 14, something like that. And the first guitar book I got was the Beatles Complete.
There you go.
I mean, it's I've still got the same book 40 whatever years later.
The same physical book.
I have the same book,
Wow.
yeah, with all its wrong lyrics, wrong chords. But apart from, I mean, so that I've rewritten so many bits over the top of it. But I started learning Beatles songs, and so I had that appreciation for the Beatles music, and there's something about it. And it just happened like when our daughters started at Dovedale School and they did music. They learned Beatles songs because the genius of Lennon and McCartney especially was they could write a song which was so catchy and easy to learn, but you try and write one and you can't. But that was the genius they had. You hear the song and it sticks in your head, and so the kids loved learning. So like I'd learned them, my daughters were then learning the Beatles songs again. So it was that learning the songs first and playing them and listening to the music. But that moment of being at the same school with my girls there, with the connection with Lennon and Harrison, and getting involved in all that fundraising with Yoko, that reignited everything, coinciding at the same time as having to give up work.
That's wild. I was thinking in lead up to this talk about a few things. There's that Steve Jobs quote. It's in the context of career advice, which is that you can only connect the dots looking backwards. And I feel like you're a good embodiment of that.
Yeah.
And there's another one that's I heard as advice on a business podcast about the two different types of opportunities. You've got window opportunities where you look through a window and you see exactly where that opportunity leads to, versus door opportunities where you're opening doors and you don't know what's behind the door. It could be something great, could be nothing, it could be something bad. You don't really know. And I thought that was, I don't know, just really interesting. I've been telling everyone that because I just love that.
No, it is great. And I think possibly what I did was I probably walked into the door, banged my head, and then opened it.
Wow.
So there's my variation on it for you.
I love that.
So I had the extra pain. So.
Wow, what made it so painful, David?
It's that whole having to change your life completely.
Yeah.
At 35, it was just not in the plans at all. And it's funny. It's one of those things. As a Christian as well, having a strong faith, which was very important, is you have this thing that God's got a plan for you. And sometimes I think it's just as well he has, because if it was down to me, what a mess I would have made of my life. And as you say, it's lovely with that thing of looking back. I now look on getting that illness and having to give up work as one heck of a blessing, because it's enabled me to do so many things I would never have been able to do. I got so much more time with my kids growing up. Which just in itself was fabulous.
Yeah.
Because like with most people, I was out the house by just after 7 in the morning, and you get back at 6:30, 7 o'clock,
and you're tired.
Most of the day's gone. You know, and I'd maybe get bath time with them, and then they're off to bed, and that was it. Well, suddenly I was around, so I got all that time. You can't buy that. It's incredible. So yeah, I look back now and it's a blessing.
And can I say, if you're 35, then I'm not going to do the math, but you look damn good for however old you are, man.
I will be 58 in June.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, so it's doing me okay.
Yeah. That's good stuff. What are some of the more interesting things that have happened throughout this journey that you wouldn't have expected?
Well, once the book was finished, and in life you have levels of contentment that you aim for. My level of contentment was to see a copy of my book on the shelf at the bookstore in town. That for me was the achievement. I was happy. If nobody bought the book or a few people bought it stuff, I didn't particularly mind, because it wasn't a project I went into to make money out of, you know, and I've never really made much money. So it's not a great career move to become an author, unless you're very fortunate. But that was my level of contentment, was just seeing my book on that bookshelf, and I was made up. Liddypool sold out.
Wow.
2,000 copies in 18 months. We then did a second pressing in 2011, which then sold out. It's in its 3rd edition at the moment. I've either authored or co-authored now in total 8 books on the Beatles. I've been invited to the US. I've been over, I must have made at least a dozen trips over the years, over into Europe. I then got to work on a documentary film, Looking for Lennon. And a lot of the people that I'd got to know, we interviewed them to tell John's story. And again, I mean, that's been sold in, I think, 26 countries, something like that. So I'm working on another documentary film at the moment. None of this I could see happening ever. And it ended up with last year, because I've got to know the guys from the Quarrymen. I went to, got invited over to Germany to do an event with Rod Davis, who's the banjo player in John's Quarrymen. And, you know, I got to know these guys for years, but I hadn't mentioned that I play guitar. It just hadn't come up in conversation. So the guy who's organising it told Rod that I play guitar. So Rod rang me and said, "What's this about you playing guitar?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Do you fancy doing some songs together?" I said, "Oh yeah, I'm up for that." So we did. So he did his talk, tells the story of the Quarrymen, play some of the songs. I did then my talk about my books, and then we just come up with a list of 10 songs, the sort of Quarrymen Beatles songs, just 2 guitars, and we did that, and it was so much fun. We then got invited back to Germany in November and did the same thing again, which went really well. So we're now going back again in June, and this time I will be performing with the Quarrymen. I'm now thinking, how on earth did I get to this point from where I was? And as again, looking back all those years to when my doctor first said, "Right, that's it, I'm signing you off work." And I think, what do I do next? And it's just been incredible. So all these experiences, all these things I've done none of which I ever expected to do. And none of it would have happened if I'd have been healthy. So don't start planning your life.
Yeah.
Anything can happen.
That's exciting, man. That must. What does it feel like to? Because it's sort of in a very overly simplistic way, one step removed from being in the Beatles.
Well, yes, those 6 degrees of separation, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and I've met so many people. So like there's so Pete Best, Beatles drummer before Ringo. After I interviewed him, he ends up writing the foreword to Liddypool for me. You know, which is a great honour. So my first book, one of the Beatles, has written the foreword to it. I helped to run the Stuart Sutcliffe fan club for the Stuart Sutcliffe family, because Stuart was the bass player with the Beatles before Paul took over in Hamburg. You know, other guys from the Quarrymen. I met Alan Williams, the Beatles' first manager. John Lennon's half-sister Julia, I know really well. And all these people I can now call on and say as friends. And they've just been so welcoming to me. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's one handshake away from the Beatles. And it's such a privilege. And because I'm always looking and always doing other things, I then have become a Beatles tour guide as well, because so many people, when they come to Liverpool, they want to know the full story. So I give private tours.
Wow.
As well. And each one of those is different, because it could be one person. Most of them are couples. Sometimes you get 3 or 4 people. But you do it as a private tour. So each one of those is different based upon whatever it is, you know, their Beatles story is.
Wow. What do you think makes the Beatles so special and enduring for such a long amount of time? And do you think it's possible for there to be something like that phenomenon again? And on top of that, is there anyone that's already out there that you think has the potential?
No, it will never happen again. It was such a moment in history, a moment in time. 1956 was completely unique because everything changed. You know, up to that point, it was jazz music, a bit of R&B. Country was very big. And then rock and roll starts. And in 56, Elvis has Heartbreak Hotel. Little Richard has Long Tall Sally. Lonnie Donegan has Rock Island Line, which starts Skiffle. And with Rock Island Line, that's what started the Quarrymen. That's what started hundreds, probably thousands of skiffle groups all across the UK, because they were picking up guitars. And these songs, they were mainly sort of American folk and country songs. So you only needed 3 chords and you could learn them. And some of the instruments were homemade. That's what got the Quarrymen started. That's what got John started. And so in 56, you've got a music phenomenon which changed absolutely everything. But you've also got in this country a time, for the very first time, when you had teenagers. Because up to that point, you went to school, you left at most at 14 or 15, and you went to work, and you dressed like your dad. And the pictures are horrible.
Sounds exciting.
But now suddenly, yeah, because the way the Education Act had changed, you could go to school till 16. You could then stay on another 2 years. But you then had these teenagers with disposable income. So they started buying records. So all the records were then targeted at this new phenomenon of the teenager.
New consumer.
So you got, yeah, exactly. So you got all these things happening all at the same time. And it changed everything. And of course, the Beatles changed absolutely everything, because they were singer-songwriters. Up until that point, Normally what happened was that if you had a good voice, you were signed. The record company went and found you a song to sing. You sang it and recorded it. That didn't happen anymore. So really, every artist who's singing, performing their own original material these days has to go back and thank the Beatles for what they did, because they changed the music industry forever. And so nothing like that will ever happen again. And just as, you know, people talk about Tchaikovsky and Mozart hundreds of years after their death, that's why they will still be talking about the Beatles, because the music, it will always come back to the music, and the music is so good and so enduring that you'll never stop talking about them.
You mentioned that the songs are really easy to learn, but very difficult to write. But I dabble in a bit of songwriting myself, and it's. What do you think what's that quality? What gave them, like, Paul dreams up? I saw a funny photo the other day. Every Paul McCartney song starts with him looking at a dog and thinking, "Oh yeah," and he just whistles the most beautiful melody out. Where does that come from?
Yeah. Well, that's just it. I mean, I've dabbled with songwriting over the years as well. I could never write anything like that. And it's like with anybody who's an artist like that, and this goes back to like those classical composers. Whatever it is, there's a natural gift that they've been given. And again, it can be timing, it could be being in the right place at the right time, etc. But if you've got that kind of talent, it is so rare to be that good. It's got to be a mixture. Because like with Paul, you know, there was music in his family. His dad was a jazz musician. You know, all his family were musical. So he grew up with music. And one of the interesting things is when you listen to their songs, you can hear the influences of what they had growing up. So with Paul, he listened to a lot of big band stuff, a lot of jazz, country, stuff in variety, something like When I'm 64 is classic British variety hall stuff. Whereas John was more Hank Williams country stuff, obviously Buddy Holly, rhythm and blues, and some of that early stuff. You can hear in the songs they write who they've been influenced by. And when you then get the geniuses of Lennon and McCartney, and then with George as well, all in the same group, you're never going to see that again. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty special. And they also are famously known for experimenting, even after inventing the wheel, experimenting with lots of other different styles. Do you have any favorite directions that they've gone in, personally?
I love the fact that every album they try something different.
Me too.
Because again, if you look at most groups, they'll find their sound and it makes them popular, so they'll stick with that, a bit like the Rolling Stones have done. Whereas the Beatles always wanted to try something new. You know, a full credit to them for doing that. And it's good to hear, sometimes to listen to the albums in chronological order and just listen to the progression. Because you can see, I mean, Please Please Me as a debut album is still probably one of the greatest debut albums. It's fabulous. It's really good. But then you can hear the different influences. You know, you get to like with A Hard Day's Night, the soundtrack. I think there's some brilliant stuff, and that's a great album. Then there's a stage on when you get up into Help, the soundtrack. Then of course everything changes, Rubber Soul and Revolver. And you think, wow, where the hell did that come from?
Gets really psychedelic.
It must have been incredible, yeah, to have been back there and listening to that for the first time. You know, because for us, we go back and we listen and think, oh wow, that's great. But we weren't there to hear it for that very first time. You know, and talking to those first generation fans, saying, what was it like? And it's a friend of mine. He said when Revolver came out, he didn't like it at first. It was so progressive, it was so revolutionary. But I think, I'm not quite sure. And he started listening to the Monkees for a little bit. But then came back to it and played it more and got into it. I just think the progression is phenomenal. And then you end up with the last album they record together, Abbey Road, almost going back to the beginning with their influences, but then taking it on further stages as well. And I think, so it's like, it's the hardest question in the world is, you know, what's your favourite Beatles song?
Yeah. All
right. You can have a top 3, and your top 3 becomes 10, 15, 20. All right. I like them all. No.
Yeah.
but there's not many songs you can say, I don't like that one. There's a few, but not many.
John famously would call some of Paul's songs grandpa music, right? he wasn't a big fan of a few.
yeah, exactly. That grandpa music was like the music hall stuff.
Yeah,
which was stuff that your parents listened to, and for most generations, you listen to music different to your parents.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, and part of that is because you want to rebel. It's quite interesting with my 3 daughters. You know, they've all listened to the same music that we all played between us, and I like a great variety of different styles. So there's set music that they'll all listen to with me still. So they'll listen to the Beatles, they'll listen to the Eagles. Do you ever listen to Status Quo?
No, I haven't checked them out.
Okay, so they were sort of my Fab Four from the 70s and 80s. So they'll listen to a lot of stuff that I listen to, but then they've all got their own individual musical tastes as well. So you find the music, and I think whatever music you find probably between the ages of like 13 and 17, that's the music that will stay with you.
And it does shape, I find, the things that you do like, because there's always that nostalgia element that is in play, even if you're not conscious of it. Yeah. Like you said that, I forget who you said, someone didn't like Revolver when it came out.
Yeah.
And then they came back around to it. I think so much of what we like is because it's in a way familiar, in a way different. And yeah, I don't think you can argue with that. Like, your taste is just your taste.
Yeah, you know what you like.
Yeah.
You know, for me, a good song will always be a good song. And it may be an artist I probably wouldn't go and listen to, but if they bring out a good song that I like, then I won't say, oh, I'm not going to listen to it. If it's a good song,
yeah,
that it should stay like that. It's a good song. Yeah. And it's good to like a variety of music, and I think that also helps if you're a fan of Beatles music, because you can listen to it and you can, the roots are in so many different forms and styles of music that it would be hard to find somebody who couldn't find at least one Beatles song that they would like. Absolutely.
I mean, I was just thinking that the Justice League trailer... No, sorry. I've made a big mistake and I've confused a Rolling Stone song for a Beatles song. Right? No, I think there was a Beatles song as well.
Don't ever do
yeah. I'm pretty sure there was a Beatles song as well. No, it was. There was a cover of Come Together.
You're the Batman?
Oh, yeah.
For a second, I remembered it as Paint It Black, but it wasn't. It was crisis averted. And it just works. And yeah, that's
a great song, isn't it?
It's beautiful. I find that the way that song starts, I'm very meticulous in how I order my playlists. I love putting Come Together after other songs just because of that. Dun, 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 you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah. Amazing. you said you don't think the Beatles will ever happen again.
No.
Technology's advancing though, and there have been holograms of celebrities, Biggie, Smalls, Tupac, and I don't think you can ever capture a live performance through technology. Maybe it can mimic it really well, but going to see an artist that you love live and feeling the energy and the energy of everyone around you, that's one of the greatest things that life has to offer, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. I love live music. It's brilliant.
It's amazing.
Brilliant.
But that said, how do you feel about potentially, younger generation like mine going to see a live show of the Beatles in hologram format?
I wouldn't mind, because it's nice. It's like when the film Yesterday came out, and that introduced all this great Beatles music to another generation. And that's it. With the Beatles tours that I do, quite often the person who wants to do the tour is the child, who can be 12, 13, 14, 15, something like that. They're the ones who've got into the Beatles music and have dragged their parents along. So the music being good music will always keep going. And so however they discover it, fine. I don't think you'll ever get anybody else who'll do what the Beatles did. But yeah, the music, it will always be so good, and people will keep listening to it, and more generations will just keep finding the music.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And that's the best way to do it, because that's what they're about. It's about the music in the end. Everything else came with it.
Yeah.
The Beatlemania, but they were changing the culture. They were involved in social history, really. If we're looking back now, we're going back like 60 years of what they were changing. It was more than just music.
It is, yeah. They're a cultural phenomenon. There's no arguing that.
Yeah.
How are you going for time?
I'm okay.
Yeah? I've got
Yeah.
2 more questions, I think.
That's fine. Yeah, I'm good.
I told the Beatles subreddit that I was going to interview you, and Crocodrillo wants to know, did Giles Martin have the chance to meet the guys when he was a kid? And did Sir George take him to the studio sometimes? And if yes, how did the Beatles react and interact with Giles? For anyone listening, I think Giles is remastering the Beatles albums now.
Yeah, so he's pronounced Giles.
Giles.
So it's Giles Martin is George Martin's son, and he's been heavily involved with Beatles projects. He started working with his dad, like when they're working on the anthology stuff, going back in. That's really sort of late 80s into the early 90s. Like he was involved in that. Now he's sort of the main guy who's doing an incredible job. So he was brought up with the Beatles phenomenon all around him.
He was part of it,
and he's just, alongside his dad, has learned the best way how to do what he does. And when you listen to those remasters, first of all, you give credit to George Martin and the engineers at the time. Because if you've got a really good quality recording, you can do so much with it.
Absolutely. You can't polish a turd.
And they were obviously... yeah, exactly right. It's very eloquent of you to say so. But no, you're completely right. If the original recording is rubbish, there's only so much you can do with it. But because they were so well recorded and stored, Jazz has been able to take that and separate it and do so much. I mean, one of the most amazing things he did a few years ago to celebrate Sgt. Pepper, he did this version of the album in like surround sound.
Wow.
And I was able to get a ticket to go to a place down in Liverpool, and there's about 40 of us in there, just a small room, comfortable on couches, turn the lights off, surrounded by speakers, and just played the whole of the Sgt. Pepper album, start to finish, with music coming all around you. They call it fully immersive sound. It was phenomenal.
Wow.
I think it was just, there was stuff coming from so many different directions that you were right in the middle of all this music. It was just incredible, and that's the kind of stuff that Giles and his team get up to. And yeah, he is a genius like his dad. Absolute genius.
That's amazing. I have a question in terms of just your opinion on some of the older mixes. I personally find that there's a charm to having the drums playing in my right ear and not in my left. What are your thoughts on that?
I know what you mean.
Like,
yeah,
it's kind of nice. You don't hear that anymore. And I know it was because of technical limitations back in the day. You had...
Well, they put a lot in mono.
Yeah.
So all they did to make it stereo, they just separated it. So instead of getting true stereo, which is like a complete spectrum, you just send some to the left channel and some to the right. Which, you know, it's worth doing with the book I did find in the Fourth Beatle, which is all about all the Beatles drummers. I'd never gone and listened to the Beatles songs and listened for Ringo's drumming. You just sort of take it for granted. But that is a really good way to do it. Because if you listen to the Beatles songs and listen for what Ringo's doing, you truly appreciate what a great drummer he is and what he contributed to the Beatles sound. He was so inventive in what he did, and by having that music separated like that, you could then go and listen to Ringo's drumming.
That's true.
And songs you'd heard over and over again, if you just concentrate on the drumming. The one I always say is, go and listen to Strawberry Fields Forever, but just listen for Ringo's drumming. And it's absolutely superb. It's always exactly right. He knew the right rhythm, when to put a fill in, when to leave the silence. You know, and he's sometimes, I think people laugh at him. He was a bit of the clown and stuff, and he's the lucky guy in the world and all that stuff. But nobody else could have done that with the other three.
He kept up.
He
more than that.
He certainly did, and yeah, absolutely, and he contributed. Just like you couldn't take John Paul or George out of a Beatles song and it'd be the same. You can't take Ringo out, because on those few songs where Ringo hasn't played drums, you know, like the Ballads of John and Yoko, which is just John and Paul playing, the drums are there, but it's not Ringo. You can tell it's not as good. It's not the same. And then just go and listen to Rain, turn it up loud, listen to Rain. It's one of the greatest songs ever. And Ringo's drumming is phenomenal. Really is. So listen to the Beatles songs in a different way. Always a good tip.
I like that. I'm going to take that to heart and listen out for the drumming, because I haven't done that.
No, I'd never done it before. I play guitar and piano, so I don't play drums. So I'd never particularly listened for the drumming.
Right.
It's worth doing.
And for better or worse, when you think Beatles in a musical context, it's not really the drumming that you do think of. It's the songwriting and the
harmonies and everything.
Yeah, and the output. They were prolific, man.
Yeah.
In such a short time.
Incredible. Yeah. Phenomenal.
Last one from another Reddit user, the Silver Beatles. This one's really on the spot. I understand if you don't have an answer, but it's, who is your favourite Beatle and why? Can be musically or personally.
I can never come down to a favourite Beatle. Depending on what the context would be. Musically, I think George is so underrated for what he contributed. His guitar work is quite unique, and because he'd learned in a country style a guy called Chet Atkins picking style. The guitar work he would do behind a song. Sometimes, again, go listen for that. Just listen to what George is playing, and the song wouldn't sound the same. But also then, I can appreciate what Paul did, almost like he's reinventing the bass guitar, because he's a frustrated guitarist who took on bass. And so instead of bass being a plod plod, it becomes so melodic. So he's brilliant for that. And the one thing musically nobody ever really talks about with the Beatles is John as a rhythm guitarist, and John as a guitarist. And his rhythm guitar is absolutely superb. He drives the songs, but he can do lead guitar as well, as we know with some of the songs. So I think musically, none of them were considered the best at their instrument in Liverpool. Individually, they were better musicians. But it's like, I always use football, soccer as an analogy. You can sign the most expensive and the best individual players, but it doesn't guarantee their work as a team. But if you get the right ones together in the right team, you can take on the world. And that's what the Beatles did together. Untouchable.
Yeah.
Because it worked. It worked.
The sum is greater than the parts. Absolutely.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, David. I love your passion for Beatles. I love what you do, and I've had a blast talking to you, mate. Is there anything you want to plug or tell people where to find you?
Yeah, if you want to come looking for me, davidabedford.com. Nice and simple. You can see my blogs. So I've got a YouTube channel, which we've had like over 1 million views in the first 12 months. So come see me walking around Liverpool. But all the contacts, all the connections you need, go to davidabedford.com and you can find out all about me and what I do.
Amazing.